Hello, young friends. How are you? Very warm good morning to all of you. I'm sure these days you must be very busy in preparation for the university examinations. And of course, they are part of our life, they shape our future. That is why it is quite necessary that we should keep ourselves busy in reading and preparing for the examinations. But still, I welcome you to this BISEC live interactive program, which I am sure would be rather helpful to all of you, simply because it deals with English, which is part of your studies. I have been talking regarding the development in English language, right from the days of Chaucer and even before that. English has been used by people. I am talking about the poets. And I have started, as you can remember, with Chaucer. I talked about his English. Then I also discussed the English used by Spenser, Shakespeare, and other poets before, say, almost 17th century. It is interesting, friends, to see that how English language has gone on changing. As I told you earlier also, that there were so many influences on the poets, on the writers. There were some psychological influences, there were some political influences, there were some political as well as regional influences which affected the English. For example, if you go through the lines of Chaucer, then we find there are plenty of words which come from, say, language French, simply because he was a part of that 100-year war against France. So he had been in France for quite some time. He was also imprisoned in France. So when he returned to his native, that is England, he brought with him so many French words which he incorporated in his works. So if you read the poems of Chaucer, you find so many difficult words simply because they come from French language. Apart from that, the difficulty in English of Chaucer is that he is using the old or middle English, and which is no longer in use today. So the students who read Chaucer would find Chaucer certainly very difficult to follow. Partly this is true in Spenser also, and so is the case with Shakespeare. But the reasons for the difficulty in these poets is quite different. In Shakespeare, it might be perhaps his style, his language, his blank verse, which is not the case with Geoffrey Chaucer. Okay, I told you about these poets last time. Now I would go on and I would come down to the 20th century, and apart from that, I would also like you to know more about the recent developments in the 21st century in English language. And I am sure, friends, the topics I have covered in my talk is interesting simply because most of you would be very much familiar with the English I am talking about in my session. So when I started with Chaucer and we saw his language, we saw his English, and we found that most of the words are obsolete because the words he is using and the spelling are no longer in use today. So if we say this is the writing of Chaucer and these are the spellings of Chaucer and it is English, so I would like to use them even today, then it would be a great problem for most of us, simply because the English he is using is no longer in use today. It is interesting to find that English has gone on developing for years together, centuries together, and even today the process is still in progress. That is why you find plenty of changes in English language, and the spelling, the grammar, and to some extent the sentence construction also. So if I talk about English of poets, right from Chaucer to Eliot, we find tremendous variations in the use of English language. Earlier I talked about Chaucer, Spenser, Milton, Shakespeare, and Wordsworth. I commented, if you can remember, that the language of Wordsworth is rather easy. The reason, he insisted on the simplicity in the language. So he wanted the language of poetry to be followed easily by the common man. That is why I gave you the example from the lyric cuckoo, it is an ode actually, then you find almost no difficulty in following that. Now I would like to talk about another romantic poet, but see the difference. The language used by Wordsworth and the language used by the poet I am talking about is far more different. I would, if you can see in the slide, it is about John Keats, and when I say John Keats, all collegians would be quite happy simply because most of you would find him to be your favorite poets. He is also like Wordsworth, a romantic poet who wrote poems long and short, lyrical and narrative, but he is a man of feelings and emotions. He is the poet of heart and he reflects the feelings of love. That is why collegians find him favorite. Now the difficulty in the English of Keats in his poems is, this is, you can, if you can see, he is known as Hellenic poet. Now Hellenic, I think you know, is the man who always talks about, it is related to Greek culture, people and language. So if we read the poems of John Keats, and of course it is in English, but we find it rather difficult in comparison to, if you compare the poems of Keats with the poems of Wordsworth, then Keats is certainly difficult simply because he is known as a Hellenic poet. That is, his verse is highly marked by the Greek references. Now for not only the English reader but for most of others it was rather difficult because there is a kind of multiplicity of words related to the ancient Greek and Roman cultures, which in turn make his poems very difficult to follow. So this is the problem with Keats English. Keats uses plenty of Greek words, number one, plenty of concepts of Greek, plenty of mythological references that come from Greek and Roman cultures. That is why if we are not familiar with those references, then certainly we would not be able to follow what Keats is saying. And I have picked up some of the lines from Keats. I would allow you some time to think it over. I would wish that you would better find and be clear regarding the meanings, and you can note down. If you got some difficulty, then I would certainly help you. So these are the lines. In the next slide you can see, I would read it out for you, and I would allow you some time. I would point out also the words which come from Greek and Roman cultures. So the first line is, round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Now you can see there is one word, one reference, mythological reference to Greek. I will talk about it later, but I will allow you some time to think it over, and I am sure most of you could do it, and you can find what the words or mythological references are. Now next line from the next poem. Therefore it is, see, this is typical poetic style. We say it is, but here it is a poem and you find an apostrophe over there, and it is called it is. With full happiness that I will trace the story of Endymion. Again there is a mythological reference to Greek culture and Endymion. And if you know, he has written a long narrative poem on Endymion, and I will talk about that later on. Now next, no, go not to the lead. Again lead, I will talk about it later on. I will allow you some time. And last, these are all lines from 4 different poems of Keats, and you will find in all of his poems, not only these are the examples, these are just some specimens, but in all poems, in all stanzas, you will find plenty of references to Greek and Roman cultures. So that there is difficulty in following his poems very easily, because if you are not comfortable, if you are not familiar with the Greek and Roman mythological references, then certainly it would be very difficult to understand what he is saying. Now the last line, away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his bards. So these are the lines from 4 different poems of Keats, and in each of them, each of these references, you will find his references to Greek or Roman cultures. So think it over. I may allow you some time. If you are comfortable, well and good. Otherwise, I will help you. So your time starts now. You may also use your dictionary if you wish. You may also consult your friends or teachers. You may also make a kind of guesswork if you can. And if you can remember, your teachers might have told you earlier, or otherwise also if you got some information regarding some words which are related to Greek and Roman culture, you will find it certainly very, very interesting. So I think, let me help you. In the first stanza, in the first lines, the word Apollo, and I'm sure Apollo is a very common word nowadays, and if I say that this is not an English word, it is not a word of English language, then you would be surprised. But it is certainly not a typical English word. Apollo is sun god. We say sun in English. When we say sun, it is actually physical matter. But when Apollo is there, then it is a kind of spirituality. It becomes a deity. So Apollo is sun god, not only the sun, not the object which is a special object. It is divine object. So Apollo, and that is typical Greek concept. So Apollo is the sun god, and he is praising the god. We in our country, for example, say Surya Narayan, and we offer prayers to the sun god. Same is the case in Greco-Roman culture. So Apollo is not an English word. Now in the next line, therefore it is full of happiness that I will trace the story of Endymion. And if you have read his long poem Endymion, he was a shepherd king. This story belongs to Greek culture. So Endymion is the hero not of English language, not of English culture, but it is related to Greek culture. So if I am, as a reader of English language, as a reader of Keats, if I am not familiar with the word Endymion, then I would certainly move here and there, and I would not be able to find what this concept, what this man, what this kind of reference mean. So Endymion is that way, refers to the Greek culture, ancient Greek culture, and that is why he was actually a Greek hero also. If I am not able to follow the concept of behind Endymion, then his English is certainly difficult. So though he is using English language, the references are to Greek and Roman culture. That is why his poems are very difficult very often, and we need to follow what the Greek and Roman references mean. Then only it would be very easy for us to follow his language. And now the next line is, there is a reference in the third reference, no, no, go not to Lead. Now Lead is the river. It is also a kind of mythological reference. In every culture, there are so many things which go common. The Lead is the river of the dead, and when the man is dead, his soul is supposed to cross this river, and it is also known as the river of forgetfulness. In our culture, for example, as per the Hindu scriptures, there is a river called Vaitarna. We have to cross it, and if we cross it, we forget what our past life was, and the moment the soul or the body crosses the Lead, he or she forgets about everything about his past life. So the Lead is the river of forgetfulness, which is a kind of river which the man or the soul of the man has to cross after the death. So Lead is the reference, again it is it comes from the Greek and Roman cultures. So for example, they are very much familiar, or if we read English language, then Thames river, for example, it occurs in most of the poems, but Leith you will seldom find. But in kids, Leith river occurs in so many poems. So that is why his English language becomes very difficult unless you follow the Greek and Roman references. And the last line, away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his parts. And if you have looked at these lines carefully, you will certainly find Bacchus is a reference to Greek and Roman culture. Actually, this typical Greek Roman word, and you find the counterpart of Bacchus in the form of Dionysus in the Greek culture. So Bacchus is the Roman god of wine, and he has a chariot because he is a god. So he would move here and there through in his chariot and his parts. So this is typical Roman reference, and this is what makes the English language of kids very difficult. So friends, what I have to remember, I have to insist here is, you find so many problems in kids simply because not it is his English, but there are references to Greek and Roman cultures. If you are familiar with the Greek and Roman mythology, then you will certainly find his English very easy. But the moment you forget everything, if you are not familiar with the words which come from Greek and Roman, and he is using them in the English verse, then his English is very difficult. So difficulty is because of his